On a grey day, we set sail from Murmansk on the international research vessel Salvo, passing rows of container cranes and the hulks of decommissioned icebreakers, our worn-out predecessors doomed to rust. We numbered 75 Coast Guard crew and 43 scientists. For most on board, it was just another job, and we entered the barren sea on course for the Arctic Ocean with no great trepidation about what lay ahead, no sense of approaching disaster. Not of the unexpected kind, anyway. For we lived daily inside the slow catastrophe of the great warming. Dead reefs, mass extinctions, and rising seas, flooded cities, wars over resources. You couldn't escape it. Every minor act, from switching on a light to flushing a toilet or munching on a loaf of bread, contributed to the crisis. Our very existence spelled the end of ourselves, so the notion that something might lie ahead on this voyage which was worse and more terrifying did not enter my mind, even though my role on the ship was to look out for imminent dangers. I led a team which carried out inspections of the Salvo, checking for signs of fire or flood, so that the scientists had peace of mind to carry out their studies, which were of huge importance. The ice caps were shrinking. Thinning sheets, like magnifying glasses, channeled the sun's rays into parts of the polar ocean that had been in lifeless darkness beneath thick ice for millions of years, before the rise and fall of civilizations. Light had woken the deep microbial past. Vast blooms of algae now flourished beneath the ice. This was our purpose, to observe the largest possible extent of the bloom at the tail end of the summer, before the sunlight vanished. As with any voyage, we braced for violent, unpredictable weather. Savage storms, freak waves, big freezes could grip the pole at any time. Despite its thinning, the ice was not to be underestimated. Rather, instability made it more dangerous. It could close in fast, entomb ships on gargantuan floes, powerless like wildebeest in a tar pit. Many sailors became spooked. We'd heard recent reports from freighter ships of disturbances beneath the Aurora Borealis, geysers of light bursting from the ice, screams in the ether, incomprehensible voices, and impossible creatures glimpsed momentarily through blizzards, larger than the extinct walrus and polar bear. Of course, we were a scientific mission and didn't believe this literally, but we were well travelled on this ocean and understood their hysteria. The planet was in awful transformation, its northern ice cap an expression of its death frenzy, flinging out wild magnetic tentacles as it dissolved into water. This was why we were heading there on the Salvo, to find out what was really going on. In early August, we manoeuvred between sculpted icebergs of brilliant blue until we reached the pack ice, where the Salvo forced its way through narrow channels between jagged white plains dotted with emerald pools. There was a dirty, grubby greenness to the outer rims of the ice where it met the water, as if it was rotting from beneath. We moored for a week at a time, while a team led by Chung and Pokrovsky took samples and brought them onto the ship for the biologists to work on. At meal times, they shared their findings. The bloom was spreading towards the pole, further north than ever recorded, 150 miles of the stuff, the sixth mass global extinction counterbalanced by this subaquatic Arctic rebirthing. Far more production is happening under the surface than we realized, announced Chung one day in the canteen, and the algae is not behaving in the way we expected. It has evolved weird genetic mutations that make it hard to classify. It'll take time for us to make sense of it. On afternoons off, crew members played football in Arctic gear on snow-dusted ice and returned with white eyebrows. My cabin mate Svensson was always urging me to play, but I preferred to take in views of the constantly mutating icescape, draw sketches in my notebook, and idle with my daydreams. This was why I had taken on this job, to leave the city and experience the world, to have space to think and breathe. I was enthralled to the possibilities of the moment, the beauty of the now. Gazing at the crystal vista beneath the endless sky, I could forget about droughts and forest fires, riots and famines, nuclear bomb tests and epidemics caused by empowered superimmune microbes, which had killed my parents among the millions, encouraging my attempts to escape from it all through a job on a research vessel. Missions like ours, and those in the depths of the Marianas Trench, were in parts to find new antibiotics and genetic solutions in the bodies of undiscovered life forms. Science was a desperate affair these days. I felt sorry for the experts on board, clutching at straws, but this was paid work, and it was good to be out in the Earth's last clean air. In late September, we cut deeper north, crunching through white slabs, meringue pieces crushed by the knife of the salvo's bow. Freezing winds made external work painful as the sun dropped ever lower, as daytime became a persistent twilight. Days before we were due to turn back for port, we received a distress signal from the American container ship Witness, which had become trapped in pack ice. We were the only icebreaker with any chance of reaching it. The trip took 4 days through insane weather. The storm blackened the stars and trembled the masts. Strange, phosphorescent green light shimmered around the hull of the salvo as it bucked and heaved. The problem with the satellite communication forced us to broadcast on crackly old radio frequencies. Messages from the Witness grew garbled, fuzzy, and died out completely. Eventually, thick blizzard revealed an enormous dark shape like a tilted tower block. It was the Witness. We pushed through to get as close as we could. There were no lights, no sign of life. For all it appeared, the ship was abandoned decades ago. A brief lull in the storm the following morning allowed Davidkin to take a rescue team across the ice, bowed into the wind, calling urgently through a loudhailer. Hours later, they returned, pale and shaken. The container ship was deserted inside, its floors coated in a slippery algae and fungal growth on the walls. Much of the furniture was littered with tiny white flakes and gossamer thin sheets of unidentified matter. They brought samples for Chung and Pokrovsky's team to analyze. We were all unnerved, but Svensson and I dutifully continued our rounds of inspection, along with Wilkinson, our third team member, who seemed particularly on edge. Eventually, she told us with some embarrassment that it felt as if there was a fourth person with us. She couldn't explain why. Svensson said the same thing happened to Ernest Shackleton and his companions as they made a desperate walk to Stromness, a whaling station in South Georgia, to get help for their stricken exploration party. I knew of that tale too, but I didn't feel a presence, so much as a dread that something terrible was happening which we did not understand. That night, the gales returned with force, rattling our ship to its bones, howling through the vents as the ice pressed hard against the hull. The captain sent out an SOS, although nobody could reach us, not in this storm, not this far north. On the third day, our ship lost all communication with the outside world. The radio was dead. But for the American container ship concealed behind the whirling blizzard, we were alone at the end of the world. Embedded in an ice floe on a planet in the gravitational grip of a sun that's turned in the Milky Way, within a universe held together by dark matter. Nausea overcame me. The sickly panic that I was glued to a vast, unknowable object, moving regardless of me, like a gnat stuck to a tractor wheel. I played some poker with Svensson and Wilkinson in the recreation room, but we couldn't relax, not when we heard rumours regarding the latest discovery in the lab. Those mysterious deposits found on the container ship were undoubtedly, irrefutably, almost certainly, it was said in hushed gaps, human skin. The captain assured us that as soon as the storm passed, we would cut our way free and return home. But this directive was soon to change, when new calls of alarm rippled through the salvo, when it became evident that someone was on board the trapped American container ship after all. We could see it with our own eyes through the spiraling snowflakes. Lights beamed from the tilted deck of the Witness. Some claimed that they saw shadows move inside. We speculated that the crew, or whatever was left of it, had been hiding from our rescue team when they boarded earlier. But why? It took another day for the weather to give us another chance to cross the ice and inspect the stricken vessel. Nervously, I watched Davidkin's team file across the snowdrifts until they disappeared behind a crag. When they didn't return within 24 hours, a second party went out to investigate. They didn't return either. The only thing that came back was a second storm which obliterated our view of the Witness, which trapped us inside our own vessel, shaken by booms of thunder, which I never heard at sea. The captain held an emergency briefing with our highest-ranking officers, while the rest of us tried to carry on our work. The panic had turned the mood. As dinner, the usually level-headed Pokrovsky, leader of the biological analysis team, unleashed an extraordinary outburst in the canteen. He clawed at his own cheeks and neck, shrieking something about it getting under his skin. When Chung tried to calm him down, he flung himself upon her, biting and scratching. It took 3 crew members to drag him off her and confine him to his cabin. As an emergency measure, it was decided that the scientists should relax for the night. Down tools, read in bed, watch some movies. In the morning, the captain would announce a plan. In the meantime, my team would continue our rounds as usual, ensuring the ship was safe. Inside the salvo, all was well, structurally speaking, despite the battering winds and shifting pack ice. Svensson, Wilkinson and I found nothing amiss. But it was when we braved the deck that we saw something out on the ice. A darkness against the white, expanding and shrinking like a lung. Through binoculars, I could make out a giant, slug-like shape. A walrus, suggested Svensson. But it couldn't be. Not only were they extinct, this didn't have any features, no discernible mouth or flippers, nor any consistency to its size and shape as it writhed slowly closer. I assigned a night watchman to keep track in case it tried to breach the hull, but he told us the next morning that the beast had seemingly plunged directly down into the ice. That was impossible, but we could see in the murky daylight that it had gone, leaving only a long, meandering red strip marking its movement. Blood, we thought. Perhaps it was a walrus after all, wounded by our bow. Wilkinson and I braved the gale to go onto the ice to check. This isn't blood, said Wilkinson, dabbing and sniffing at the red smear. This is something else. We hacked away a chunk and took it back to the ship for the biologists to test. The lab was locked. Chung, clearly affected by the missing rescue teams and Pokrovsky's attack the previous evening, had suffered a breakdown, we were told. Crying, wailing, ranting about pain in her skin. She too had been confined to a cabin, as had several more of their team, all in states of distress, marked by outbursts of vitriol and violence. Others, including Coast Guard crew, lined up to see the doctor, complaining of rashes, nausea, stomachache. Scuffles broke out in the corridor as they grew more impatient and aggressive. We could only find one scientist willing to look at our hunk of stained ice. He had no doubt about what the red substance was. Spores, he said, scratching his arms. Those are spores. That night, we could hear thumping on the doors of the locked cabins and the screams of biologists, threats to kill us all unless they were freed. "We are thirsty for light," pleaded Pokrovsky. "It was an outbreak of some kind," said the captain, "of hysteria or infectious disease, she knew not which. There were not enough remaining Coast Guard crew to deal with the situation. Neither were my own team unaffected. At breakfast, Wilkinson solemnly showed me her fingernails. They were green with fungal growth. Her toes, too. Everything itched. She had this urge, she said, to leap out onto the ice, to freeze it off, to cleanse herself. I told her to stay calm, see the doctor immediately, get some treatment for the disease, now while she could. At this, her face soured. She let out a scream, grabbed a fork like a dagger, and came at me across the table, eyes wild. "It's you," she said. "You're the disease!" 2 crewmen grabbed her and dragged her kicking to her quarters, where they locked her in. As soon as the storm abated, the captain promised me we'd leave this place. But what place was this? A block of ice on a body of water, on a globe in empty space. What were we leaving? Where were we escaping to? There was nothing but the world, and we were of that world. Microbes lived inside us, digesting our food, defending us, attacking us, entirely disregarding us. They were in the sea, on the land, in our cities, in our water supply, beneath the ice of the Arctic, blooming and mutating, seeping up into the light. There was nowhere to go but here, and here was everywhere. "The itch!" screams Chung from behind her locked door. "It's unbearable! Take it off! Let me get out of it!" It didn't take long for most of the remaining crew, gripped by the madness, but with not enough people left to restrain them, to escape from the ship and onto the ice, heedless of the wind and snow. Some of them unlocked the doors of the cabins to let out the prisoners, red raw from the scratching, psoriatic flakes of skin piled on the furniture within. When I checked her quarters, Wilkinson was gone, leaving only smears of blood on her sheets, and something scratched into the metal of her bunk in a spidery scrawl. "We are the disease." Armed with a steak knife from the kitchens, I made my way through the ship in search of her, hiding from the occasional crew member as they hurtled past in the grip of their mania, half-dressed or even naked. I spotted Svensson running up some stairs, his screams less those of pain and more a kind of war cry. I called his name, and he turned briefly, eyes wild and confused. Then he sprang from view. I followed Svensson up to the deck, but there was no sign of him. It was hard to make out anything clearly in a darkness obfuscated by snow, but in the shimmering light of the salvo, I saw a figure below. It was Wilkinson, or the top half of her anyway, embedded in the ice, clad only in a t-shirt. She steadily and rhythmically paddled her arms as if wading waist-deep against fast-moving water. Luminescent algae streamed up through the cracks in the surface around her midriff, turning her exposed arms and neck green, illuminating her face, stricken with a combination of terror and ecstasy. "Wilkinson!" I cried out. "Ellen!" I thought for a moment she could hear me, her head tilted at an angle, mouth opening as if to speak. And out poured a column of black, viscous matter. It kept coming and coming, thickening into a black coil around her torso, expanding and contracting. Breathing. I staggered back with a cry. Behind me there was a loud click as the door opened, and the captain emerged, uniform in shreds, shocked momentarily by the blast of wind, looking frantically around her as if for an escape. I raised my quivering knife in defense, and she came screaming at me in a fury, then flipped right over the edge. I didn't peer down to see what happened to her, but other figures on deck were moving erratically in my direction, barking nonsensical gibberish. I lost my nerve and I fled. We cannot stop them. All that we 13 remaining, uninfected crew members can do is barricade ourselves into the kitchens, where there are supplies of food and knives behind heavy doors. Here, we must wait out the storm. At night, the ice pushes so hard against us, it feels as if the ship will split and take us down into the infested depths. Despite the gale howling through the vents and rattling at the gantry, we can hear them. The sluggish entities that crawl up the hull and seethe on the upper decks, releasing spores into the wind. They drone and weep and seep their strange microbial cacophony into my thoughts. Even when I put my fingers in my ears, the noise roars within me, through the rivers of my blood, into the forests of my gut flora, across the teeming oceans inside my cells. The sound is outside and inside, and nothing makes a difference. It will never go away. It feels like there is a coating of slime on my skin. I cannot see it, but I know it is there. I have the urge to tear it off, rip myself out of myself, become something other, something not of this world, of this universe, this waking nightmare. But I don't tell the others. If they find out, they may kill me, or eject me from the ship. As a last resort, I have taken to scribing this private journal of events, which, I suspect, will be the only evidence left on board the Salvo of what has occurred. A written legacy left to whatever remains of humanity, for as long as it lasts. Our only hope is that we 13 are somehow immune, as the gale dies down, and we can steer the ship free with a skeleton crew. In that unlikely event, we will have to abandon our friends and colleagues on this frozen plateau to the mercy of the algae bloom, and to each other. In the darkest hours we can hear them outside, whooping and screaming, hurling obscenities at the stars. And we are so afraid.